Daniel 10. Daniel 10 is a rare look behind the scenes into what's going on with the angels of heaven and the affairs of men. It is truly a marvelous chapter that gives us some insight into what's going on, into the workings of angels and of men. Before we go into this chapter, however, I want to review with you some very important points, and if we're ever going to have a test, you need to know these things. So I'm giving you the answers already, okay? And what are the important texts in proving that Daniel 8 and 9 are connected, and therefore that the 490 years are cut off from the 2300 days? So here's the information we want to establish without question. First of all, we have missing from chapter 2, as we've mentioned before, the judgment, where it's emphasized in chapter 7. Then we see a few things in chapter 8 that we need to notice, and in chapter 9. First of all, what is the vision in Daniel 8 called in the original Hebrew? 2300 evenings and mornings. So when we get to the last part of Daniel chapter 8, we read in the text that the vision of the 2300, the vision of the evenings and mornings, which was told, is true. So that's Daniel 8, verse 26. Secondly, Daniel 8, verse 16, Gabriel is told to explain the vision that he had in Daniel 8, 1 through 14. Gabriel explained all but the timing of the 2300 days. We read this in Daniel 8, verses 17 through 25. Then in Daniel 8, verses 26 and 27 again, Daniel did not understand the vision even of the evening and morning. That means the 2300 days, though it astonished him. Then we see in Daniel chapter 9, 1 through 20, the 12 to 14 years later, Daniel was engaged in earnest prayer and Bible study to find out by prayer, supplication, fasting, what God had said through Jeremiah some 70 years earlier. Gabriel came and he said that he was sent from the throne of God to give him explanation concerning the vision. In Daniel 9:22, Gabriel said he would give Daniel understanding. In 9:23, Gabriel reminded Daniel of the previous vision. Thus, this must have been the vision of Daniel 8. There is no record of any other prior appearance of Gabriel. Daniel 9, verse 24, Gabriel's explanation was clearly of a time prophecy, that part which was missing from the 2300-day evening and morning prophecy. That's Daniel 9:24. That's that verse that outlines the whole thing, which gives the time. And what is the time? From the going forth of the command to rebuild and restore Jerusalem. And we had how many commands to go and rebuild Jerusalem? How many were there?
4.
There were 4. So we look at different scenarios of that. And of course, we usually say 3. 3 are the primary ones. I would like to encourage you to look at the Bible commentary on pages 100 to 113 or so, which gives some explanations, 110, excuse me. Actually, it's 100 to 107. Gives some time. There's also 8 and 9 here. It shows some chronologies of different kings, Artaxerxes, Darius, and so forth. These timings here are brought out in a Bible commentary of who was king when and how all these things happened according to time and the dates involved. So I'd like you to read those pages at some time in your experience to try to understand the things concerning the dates of that time. Now there's another good book that helps us with a lot of explanations about this time and the history of the rise of the Advent movement, particularly the work of William Miller, and that is called Prophetic Faith of Our Fathers. And this book has some information in it, pages 790 and 792 particularly. In these pages, we have 6 different charts of what William Miller was calculating and how he was trying to figure out exactly the dates for the end of the 2300 days. So here's 6 of those charts that they were developed in the time of the Millerite movement around 1842, 1843, 1844. So they had different calculations of how the timing was going to be, but I'm going to draw just a little bit of that on the board so you might understand what they were going through. First of all, the decree was in what year? The third decree, which gave them authority to actually pass laws and actually punish people. Even capital punishment could be meted out by the government now in Jerusalem, and that was in 457. Okay, 457 was that time. Now we have the year 457, and we're just going to try to mark it out here as if it were a calendar. So we have the beginning of the year. When would be the beginning of the year, approximately?
Springtime.
Springtime.
April.
So you have spring here. You have spring, summer, fall, and then winter as part of the year. So if you would go from the beginning of the year and you would cross the year 0, which doesn't exist, and then come into the time of the fulfilling of the 2300 days, where would you come? So you're coming from sometime in 457, and you would be coming to where?
1844.
Well, actually, it would look like 1843 to 1844. But what part of the year? It would be the spring of 1843, wouldn't it? And then the spring of 1844. Okay? So now, the problem is, from the going forth of the decree to rebuild and to restore Jerusalem would be 2300 evening of mornings. So if you calculate it from the spring, let's say it came from here, then you would come to the spring of 1843. Because that would be the calculation of the years precisely. But now, if the decree was given some other part of the year, let's say it was given in the fall of the year, it would come where? In the fall of 1844. And I may be wrong about this. Maybe it would be 1843. But the problem was, as the decree was given here, it took 6 months for the decree to come to Jerusalem, for them to realize the decree. So once they figured all that out, it came over here now to this fall of 1844, to October 22nd. So that's a brief explanation of those 6 charts that I just showed you in Fromm's Prophetic Faith of Our Fathers, Volume 4. Yes, sir?
So where did they get, sorry, I guess I just didn't get it when you said it, but where did they get October 1844 from exactly?
October 1844. All right. The original calculations were figuring from 457.
Yeah.
So if they were calculating the whole thing out, when was the decree given and when was it actually come into Jerusalem? So it took, from the time the decree was probably made in 457 till it reached Jerusalem was 6 or 7 months before they got the papers and the authority that gave them the actions the ability to actually act as their own government.
Okay. Okay, I see. So it would have changed it from the spring of 1844 to October to the fall.
That's what happened because the first estimation was 1843.
Yeah.
Then the next estimation was this March of 1844.
And how did they get that? How did they change the estimation from 1843 to 1844?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I would have to read the books again and understand that. But it could be that this was the problem,
Yeah.
that they hadn't calculated that. But there were some adjustments that they made along the way.
Mm.
This happened over time, and different people had something to do with it.
And do you know how they came up with an exact date in 1844? Like it was October, I think they said October 22nd, 1844?
Yes.
How did they come up with that exact date?
Because that was the day of Yom Kippur in 1844,
Oh,
the day of judgment.
okay.
Because according to the Jewish calendar and the equinox and the moon cycles and all that, the calendar for the Jewish calendar in 1844, that was the Day of Atonement, the day of Yom Kippur. That's how they came up with that date.
I see.
Okay? Now, that being said, we need to look at a little bit of the problem as far as the Jewish calendar is concerned. I'm sorry, I haven't got exactly all the information for you this morning according to all this, but I'm giving you what I have. No excuses. So, what does a Jewish calendar look like? Because this is one of the problems that we're having. In ancient times, the Jewish calendar was calculated by vision, by observation. You have the new moon, and then you have the first sliver of the moon. And when the Sanhedrin got two viable reports that they saw the sliver of the moon, then they could start the month, and then they send out their notices that the month had started. Quite an exact science, I would say. Something less than an exact science on how to calculate the months. So how many moon cycles do we have a year? 12.4 approximately. And we have like 29 and a half days moon cycle. Actually, because the moon is going around the earth, and the earth is going around the sun, it's actually something less than 29 and a half days, more like 28 and a half days for the moon to do exactly 360 degrees. But because it's going around the earth and the earth is going around the sun, it turns out to be approximately 29 and a half days. So if you have a lunar calendar, which the Jews still have today, then you have months of 29 and 30 days, alternating, 29, 30, 29, 30. But in ancient times, like we were just saying, they calculated the beginning of the moon by observation. Now, one of the problems that they had, one of the things that they were dealing with, is that certain days or certain feast days could not fall on Sabbath. So if you calculated the months according to the moon, and you started the year at a particular time, and it caused some of the feast days to fall upon a Sabbath or on a preparation day, I don't remember how exactly they did it, but that meant you needed to add another day to the calendar just so you would keep the feast days from falling on a Sabbath. So again, we have kind of something of less than an exact calculation being able to be made in ancient times of where they started the months and where they started the year, because the year was started according to the barley harvest. So if the barley harvest wasn't ready, they added another year of Adar. So we cannot really know exactly when the year started, say, in the time of Christ. What was the exact date of the beginning of the year, say, in AD 27 or AD 31? We don't know exactly. We don't have exact records. Because if it was a cold period of time, and of course now we're experiencing quite a warm weather here. Some other people are experiencing rather cold weather. Let's say in Palestine they were experiencing rather cold weather. The barley harvest wouldn't be ready to begin because you can't begin the barley harvest until Passover. When Passover comes, then you can begin the harvest, and then you have 50 days to bring in the harvest, and then you have the day of Pentecost when you bring the 2 loaves of first fruit offering into the temple and give them to the Lord. And it's only then that you can eat the harvest. You have to have brought those loaves to the Lord and offered them as a heave offering before the Lord before you could eat any of the grain yourself of the harvest. So if the weather was rather cold, they would have to add another month of Adar at that time to push the calendar back so that the year would start later in the year, so that the grain would be ripe enough to harvest, and there would be enough time to harvest the grain during 50 days and bring those 2 loaves into the sanctuary. So all this is some speculation involved in when exactly the days of the year began, whether it was sometime in late March or maybe even late April for that to happen, because they couldn't start the year until the full moon after the equinox, when the harvest was almost ready to begin, because they had to bring the wave sheaf offering into the temple, and only once they waved the first ripe grains before the Lord, they could then begin the harvest. They couldn't cut the grain until they had Passover. Passover must occur first. And there were years when the grain was not ripe enough for the harvest, and yet what they did was they took a few of the ripest grains and they laid them on the hearth of a fire, and that allowed them to receive the warmth from the fire and dry out a little bit so that they could turn a little bit white, or golden, and then they could wave them before the Lord, and then they could have permission to begin the harvest as soon as it was ready. So all these things had to do with the agrarian lifestyle of the Hebrews, that they were a people of the land, and then they could begin doing the yearly feast and calculate everything for the year.
So that was the starting of the religious year, right?
The religious year. So you're talking about the religious year. So now let's look at the calendar. I don't know, did we explain this before? 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have a secular calendar, and the first month is Nisan. And it's not a car. Nisan. The second month is Iyar, I-Y-A-R. Third month is Sivan, that's I-V-A-N. Fourth month is Tammuz. Fifth month is Av. And sixth month is, Elul. Elul, E-L-U-L. And then the seventh month, and this one you must remember, Tisri, T-I-S-H-R-I. This is the seventh month. Okay? You should know Nisan and Tisri. Now the secular calendar matched with the sacred calendar in that we have, this is again the seventh month, but it's the first month of the secular calendar. And we have then another 7 months. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. And then the sacred calendar begins again, with an exception. This would be C-H-E-S-H-V-A-N. Cheshavan, I guess. All right, then we have Kislev as the 9th month or the 3rd month of the secular calendar. We have Tevet, that's Hevat, and then we have Adar is the last month, and Adar 1 is a leap year. It's a leap year month. They added a month because you have, how many months do you have in a year? 12.4 lunar months. So this one would be added, and this, and then that would move over, and then this would be Adar 1, and then you would have an 8th month in a year, which would be, would be called Adar Bet. Bet, B-E-I-T. This would be the real Adar. This would be the last month of the year. It would also be what month? It would be Nisan of the second secular calendar. So this would be one. This would also be Nisan. N-I-S-S-A-N. So this would be called Adar Bet, and that would be the 8th month. So if they added an extra lunar month, they would have to do it on regular occasions. Now, when would they add another month? This is kind of interesting. Some of you played piano, and somebody has given a nice illustration of when they would add and what years they would add, because they would add, in 19 years, they would add 7 extra Adar 1s in the calendar to keep it concurrent with the real calendar. So if we were to make a piano key here, like I'm trying to put in the black notes, here, 3 together. So we would have, like, let me get my illustration so I don't mess it up. Now here it is. All right, so we have the keys here, and then it would work like this. If you could follow me, we have 1, 2, 3 years, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and then the last one would be 18, 19. So if you were to draw this out on a piece of paper, which years would they add another year? Well, the 3rd year, the 6th year, the 8th year, the 11th year, the 14th, the 17th, and the 19th year, they would add another month. Where there's no black keys, you only put 2 years. And that's how you figure out when they would add another month. Are you confused? Okay, in 19 years, okay, the principle is in order, because there's 12.25 months, lunarly speaking, in a real solar year. 12.25 months, you have 12.4 months. In 19 years, you would need to add plus 7 months to make it come out equally every 19 years is your cycle. But which months would you add, which years would you add another month? You would add it in the 3rd year, in the 6th year, in the 8th year, the 11th year, the 14th year, the 17th year, and the 19th year. They would add another month to make it come out to the solar year. so that the barley harvest, the wheat harvest would come at the right time of the year. Otherwise, you're just going to move back into winter and then into summer, in the fall, into summer, and you're going to lose a whole year within a short period of time. Yes, Danny?
Okay, so for the leap year then, it would be on the 7th month of the secular calendar that would be the extra month?
That's right. It would have an 8th month in the secular calendar.
So what's the name of the 7th month? Because I see 6 and 8 have a name, but 7th is just...
7th month is Adar.
Adar as well?
Wait a minute.
Yeah, that's
You're
the
right
exact
there.
same question I was gonna ask.
All right, sorry, we have to go back to the notes. Okay, we have Sava, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This would be 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 in Adar. So that would be, that would be 6, and then, yeah, that's what I've done wrong. So I've added another month here that doesn't belong here. So there would be 6 months here. This would come to Adar, and then this would be the Adar Bet. Okay? So I'm sorry, I goofed that up. Didn't understand it myself. I had an assumption that was incorrect.
So that 6 month is it called
So
Adar?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That would be a normal year.
But what about that 7th month?
The 7th month would have to be Adar 1. And in a normal year, it would be, this would be called Adar Bet, and this would be called Adar Bet.
On leap year.
So they would put Adar in here, instead of Adar here, and then this would be Adar Bet. B-E-I-T-H, right? B-E-I-T. So this would be Adar Bet. And then we would come and start the Nisan here. Okay? So that's basically how it works. So I was confused on this once you corrected me.
Okay,
Yes.
just because I'm still a little confused, just to clarify. So on a normal year, not a leap year, we go from Nisan to Tishri, and then from Tishri to
Adar.
1.
Adar, it isn't called Adar 1 in a non-leap year.
Okay, so that 6 month then wouldn't be there on a non-leap year.
No.
So we would have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7, Adar B.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Which would be 6.
That would be 6 at that point. And then we would start on Nisan again. But then on the leap year, that's when we have that Adar 1 at the 6th position.
Adar,
Right.
cycle, Adar 1.
Exactly.
Is it?
So the length of Chesvan and Kislev are determined by complex calculations involving the time of day the full moon of the following year, Tishri, and the day of the week that Tishri would occur in the following year. What all that means, I'm not sure. After many years of blissful ignorance, and the writer says, I finally sat down and worked on the mathematical calculations of the Jewish year, which may be of interest to those who want a deeper understanding and who want to write a Jewish calendar and so forth. And he gives you places where you can go to look this up. Okay, the number of days between Nisan and Tishri is always the same. So the number of days between here and here is always the same. That can't change. Because of this, the time for the first major festival, Passover, in Nisan, to the last festival of Sukkot, or in Tishri, is always the same.
But it's not always the exact same dates because it depends on barley harvest, right?
That, as far as our Julian calendar is concerned, which is only was only done in the, when was the Julian calendar come into effect? Only in the 16th century, I believe, 1500s. So these are some of the difficulties we're dealing with when we're dealing with the Jewish calendar. So I'm sorry that I'm not an expert on this, but as you can see, trying to figure it out in the 1840s was a major difficulty because they were going according to the Jewish calendar, trying to come up with the dates that would apply to the time of the Day of Atonement in 1843 and 1844. So, without going any further into this, I ask you to consider looking further into this if you want to have a better understanding of it, because I have not mastered this as such. But I wanted to give you a glimpse of the problem, because we have 29 days in one calendar year, one calendar month, and then 30 in the next. So if they were going to make any calculations about the days, the number of days in the year, they would have to do it here in Adar sometime. So they would adjust the calendar maybe one day so that the feast days in the next year would not come out at the wrong time, on the wrong days. That's how it was done, as far as I understand. So these days, Nisan and Tishri are the important ones, and you need to remember Adar. You'll find these in the Bible. I'd like to ask you if you can find any references to any of these months in Scriptures. Look up these months in Scripture and find out what you can find out about the particular months. So look for it. You'll probably find lots of references to Nisan and Adar. So give me one reference for every month that you can find. Okay? That will be your homework for the months of the calendar. And draw out the months of the calendar on a chart, your own chart, so that you can have that as your homework. And then find biblical references for it. Okay. Now we're going to move on into Daniel 10. As we looked in Daniel 9, what was your impression from Daniel 9 particularly? Do you have any comments, any things that was particularly of interest to you as we studied Daniel 9, or any questions perhaps from our last study that you would like to ask at this time? Daniel 9 is a key study for the Advent movement. Its understanding of that chapter and chapter 8 are key to our doctrinal understanding of many things. And as we look at the story of salvation and everything and compare it, connect it to the sanctuary service, which we will study also, we will find many lessons that we can draw from the study of the prophecies and also from the sanctuary service itself. So now, we're going into chapter 10. Who would like to summarize first what we learned in Daniel 9? What was Daniel 9 about? According to what happened in Daniel 8 and Daniel 9, what was Daniel 9 about? If I were to ask you that on a test, what would you say? What was missing in Daniel 8?
It was an explanation of the vision.
Which particular part?
Time part.
The time. So Daniel 9 is particularly about time. So 9 time. It rhymes. It also rhymes with rhyme. So what is Daniel 9 about? It's about clarifying the time. The time for the beginning, from the going forth of the decree. So we tried to explain a little bit about how difficult it was to figure out that timeline. And we have like 6 different charts that were developed on that issue. Now we're going into Daniel chapter 10. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. When was this approximately? This is approximately the time when the Jews are going back to Jerusalem. So we come again to the scripture that above all others has both the foundation and the pillar, the central pillar of the Advent faith was unto 2,300 days in the sanctuary shall be cleansed. So Daniel chapter 10 happens a few years after the vision in Daniel chapter 9. So in chapter 7, we see Christ as a king. So the first year of Belshazzar was probably about 550. Chapter 8 was Christ as priest, and that was the third year of Belshazzar, which was, we believe, around 548. Chapter 9, we see Christ as sacrifice. So in the first year of Darius, about 539. So they were in captivity more than 60 years. 68 years, it says in our notes here. And Daniel's age was at least probably 83, maybe older. I read one reference that said he died at 110. But that's another view of the time schedule. So chapter 10 is now Christ glorified. So interesting. What is chapter 8? As king. Chapter 7 as king. Chapter 8 as priest. Chapter 9 is sacrifice, and now Christ glorified. This is the third year of Cyrus, about 536, 535. This is when the first wave of Jews had gone back to, or were going back to Jerusalem. So what do we have in the elements of chapter 10? We have the vision. We have the encounter with Gabriel, the first one, and then the second encounter with Gabriel, and we might say also an encounter with Michael. So the body of the chapter, verses 1 through 10, we're going to read now at this time and study. We'll go verse by verse. What does verse 1 say to us? What do we have in verse 1? Chapter 10.
In the third year of Cyrus king of Persia, the thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belshazzar. And the thing was true, but the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing, and had understanding of the vision.
Well, now that's interesting. Why was Daniel called Belteshazzar? Does anybody remember from Daniel chapter 1 and 2?
We were given a new name by the king.
Okay, what does Daniel mean? God is my judge, but what does Belteshazzar mean? You remember? I think it means servant of Baal, right?
Wow.
Yeah, wow. But the time appointed, the Sabbath, was Gadol. How do we understand this statement? But the time appointed was long. Well, how do we understand that? Notice what it says, and he understood the thing and had understanding of the vision. Now, how important is this text in the context of what we studied in Daniel 7, 8, and 9?
It took him a really long time to understand.
Was it that it was his understanding was long, or the time appointed was long?
Or at the time.
So Daniel understood, according to this verse, that the time appointed, what time appointed? We read in chapter 9, where does it talk about the appointed time? Well, we see that the last 4 verses talk about when this thing was going to be. Until the consummation of that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So we have the time appointed basically there. What was Daniel 9 about? The time, right? And what is the first statement in chapter 10? That the time appointed was long. So Daniel was figuring that it was now. But God had said and caused him to understand that the thing was appointed was a long time off, or great, as the margin says in some Bibles. So from chapter 10, we have a very important factor that gives some explanation and understanding of what went before. That while Daniel was seeing or believing, according to Jeremiah, looking at the earthly Jerusalem, the time was now, God was telling him that the time appointed was long or great or still in a way far in the future. So great in any sense, hence older or insolent and so forth, it's translated in these ways in the King James Version. Exceeding, far, great, and so forth. So we find here that the time appointed, the Tishab, a mass of persons or figuratively of things, especially organized for war, by implication a campaign or appointed time. So the appointed time was yet far off. That's what we have in verse 1. In the different translations we here have the New American Standard Bible, we have the message was true and one of great conflict, but he understood the message and had an understanding of the vision. This is a contrast to what we see in the end of chapter 7 and the end of chapter 8, that he didn't understand the vision. In the New International Version it says, its message was true and it's concerned a great war. That's kind of an interesting translation. American Standard Version, the ASV, and the thing was true, even a great warfare. Revised Standard Version, and the word was true, and it was a great conflict. The Young's literal translation, the YLT, and the thing is true, and the warfare is great. So we see that these modern translations are talking about the truth of a great war. But if we look in the King James Version and in the original, it is that the appointment is of a great time. So they're trying to say it has to do with a great war, which may be so. But it has to do with a long off appointed time as well. All right, we're going to look now at verses 2 through 4. So what is the significance of Daniel 10, verse 1? It ties together 8 and 9. And it particularly says that Daniel understood it, and it was a great way off. It was a great way, time appointed was long. Let's read now 2 through 4. Why would Daniel fast for 3 full weeks? So Daniel understood that the vision that he received in Daniel 8 was for a great way off. And Daniel 9 explained that. But why now has he gone back to fasting? Because that's what he was doing in Daniel chapter 9. Let's read 2 through 4, please. Want to read it again, Adrian?
In those days I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant bread, neither came flesh nor wine in my mouth. Neither did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled.
And 4.
And in the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel.
Okay, then we can see, we'll talk about what happened. So what do we learn from Daniel here in these verses? Interesting verses. What kind of fast was he having here? Complete abstinence, or was he just limiting himself? I think it says he didn't have any pleasant bread, bread of desires, anything like jam on his bread, but maybe he was eating something, bread and water perhaps. So he didn't have anything but very, very simple food, just barely sustenance. He had also, what does it say about he didn't anoint himself? What does that mean to you?
He didn't wash himself.
No, it means he didn't put on any oil or anything on his body. He didn't use any lotion, yeah, we would call it today. No. But this means also that during other times he did use emollients on his skin or whatever, or maybe some what we would call nice smelling things. But at this time he did not. Yes? Eric?
Does this verse mean that after 3 weeks were fulfilled, he had flesh and wine?
No, it means that till a full 3 weeks he had done this, and then something happened. So he fasted for 3 weeks, and then what happens is that Gabriel comes to see him. How long did it take Gabriel to come and see him in Daniel chapter 9? Almost immediately. So we have a contrast here in Daniel chapter 10. And we're going to see why. So what happened in 9? Almost immediately. While the command was given, while he started to pray, the angel was sent forth. But now we see a contrast with that. Notice the difference when you start comparing chapters and verses. Also notice the details here of how he is fasting. So Sister White says the true fast is the abstinence from all stimulating foods. So what kind of fast was Daniel doing here? He was taking the true fast, the abstinence of all stimulating food. Nothing of any stimulating nature at all was he taking. Very pleasant, very simple diet. No pleasant bread or bread of desires. Nothing that had any kind of dressing on it or anything. Yes, Richard?
Yeah, so he was in mourning because he actually finally understood the vision, or?
Well, let's put it this way. It says that he understood the vision, and that was for a long time off. So now we could say that Daniel could set aside what had concerned him in chapter 9, not understanding what God had said in chapter 8. But now he still came back to the other issue. What was the other issue? What was current in his life at this time? The fulfillment of the prophecy to Jeremiah. No. So now he had an understanding of the vision of Daniel 8, chapter 8, because of the explanation in Daniel 9, and therefore he could let it go. And now he could come back to what was still concerning him. What was concerning him in chapter 9? That Jerusalem was in ruins. So he understood that the vision didn't have to do with the current building of Jerusalem. So now he still had, his prior concern was not answered. And it took him, some 3 years probably to get settled and understand what he saw in chapter 9. Now he's come back to fasting and prayer because he knows the time is at hand for Jerusalem to be restored. So now he was by the great river Hiddekel, and I had a book one time called Vision by the Hiddekel, and I loaned it to a friend of mine, and he never gave it back. But it's a very interesting book, and it talked about Brother James White, how he viewed the chapter 11 of Daniel. And if you ever get a chance to find that book, Vision by the Hiddekel, let me know. I'd like to read it again, because that was 40 years ago. But it quoted some of James White's views of these chapters. And so we see here that Daniel now is fasting by the Hiddekel, which we could say is the Tigris River, actually. Babylon is on the Euphrates, but he was somehow in another province across the other side of the valley by the river Hiddekel, or Tigris. And he lifted up his eyes, and what did he see? Let's go now into our study here, verses 5 and 6. What was Israel guilty of? What do we see in Daniel's words here? Can you read it again for us, Adrian? 5 and 6.
Then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words were like the voice of a multitude.
Wow. We see a great vision here. Does anyone have any thoughts about these words? What does this bring to mind to you? Anything?
Appearance.
Pardon?
Well, it brings out the appearance of the person who's on.
So he's seeing appearance of someone, and
Sounds like the appearance of Jesus or God in man.
yeah, and pardon?
Revelation?
Like in Revelation, which chapter?
1.
Chapter 1. Isn't it very similar?
Yeah.
Same words, same. Of course, remember, these are translations out of Hebrew into English, and the words in Revelation are translated out of Greek into English. So we have to kind of get the idea. The words may not be exactly the same, the phrase is the same, but if we could compare the Septuagint translation here, would be kind of interesting and have a greater parallel with what we see in Revelation chapter 1. So we're seeing a vision here of Christ, and I'd like to read, maybe you could read it for us, Richard, the comment and the Bible commentary, which you have in your Bible study, your study Bible there. At the bottom of the page it says 10 verses 5 through 7. Christ appeared to Daniel.
Oh, yeah.
Could you read that for us?
Sure. No less a personage than the Son of God appeared to Daniel. This description is similar to that given by John when Christ was revealed to him upon the Isle of Patmos. Our Lord now came with another heavenly messenger to teach Daniel what would take place in the latter days. This knowledge was given to Daniel and recorded by inspiration for us, upon whom the ends of the world are come.
So we have here now understanding a little bit about the time or the difficulty of projecting the time of the fulfillment of the 2300 days because of the Jewish calendar and how things were done in ancient times. And now we have an introduction to the chapter 10. And what do we learn from the introduction to chapter 10? First of all, as we just stated, the calculating of the ancient times of ancient times, the calendar of ancient times, is not an easy matter. It's not a science. It's not like you could put it into a computer program and come up with the dates, because these things were done by human observation. So it's just impossible to know exactly the times. Secondly, what do we learn from Daniel chapter 10, verses 1 through 4, about Daniel and his relationship with Daniel 8 and 9? What is the comparison do we have here? What kinds of comparisons? How many comparisons can you draw?
The time at the explanation.
Okay. So he understood the vision according to the time. Now he could accept that. What is the difference between his experience in Daniel chapter 9 and chapter 10? How long did it take the angel to appear? In chapter 9, almost immediately. In chapter 10, 3 weeks. How long is 3 weeks? 21 days. So in Daniel chapter 9, we could say he came within 21 minutes. But in Daniel chapter 10, it took 21 days. So there's a difference here in the approach. And we'll see what the reason is for that as we go on in our study. We just want to summarize now. The beginning of chapter 10 gives us another emphasis, another reason to understand that the time element of chapter 9 has to do with giving the explanation that wasn't given in chapter 8 regarding the explanation of the vision. So the angel was told to make Daniel understand the vision. He did not. But in chapter 9, he had the missing link to that. And different from chapter 7, 8, and 9, we have now a statement in chapter 10 that says that Daniel understood the vision. Therefore, he could let the part that he understood go. And what did he understand? What did he understand about the vision? That it was for a
time way off in the future.
Yes, a long time in the future. Okay, so we're going to take a break now as we go, before we go into the rest of the chapter. We'll take a short break, 5 minutes or so, and have a word of prayer now and go into the next part of our study after a short time. So let's kneel down. I'd like to ask Leo if you'd pray with us as we close this portion of our study.